if you're a safety, you can't say I'm not a safety because I'm in the box.
Yeah,
right?
it's subjective, I feel like.
Is the argument essentially, hey, they're running a 4-4 defense here? Like that's what it becomes. Right? Because just because you're in the box doesn't mean you're not a safety.
Yeah, and he's positionless. I think you can make that argument that he's positionless, but I don't think that you can make the argument that he's not a safety, if that makes sense. I feel like he can be slotted as a, let's say, we talk about sports cars. He's like a sports linebacker. He's a fast linebacker, but this is not exactly the kind of person that you want to be taking off-road.
He plays safety. Like that's the spot he plays on the field. He's a safety.
He doesn't play safety in the traditional way that people talk about the safety position, though.
But he plays safety.
I guess.
Unless you're telling me that the template for their defense is something different. Like he lines up at safety. Like that's the spot he is.
Does he line up at safety though? I mean, he lines up on the field. I don't know if you could really describe the style he plays as safety, because everyone wants to put safeties into this box of like, hey, this guy's an important cover player. And not just, I say, the free safety position, but also the strong safety. There seems to be this desire to make sure that guy is this specific kind of player in coverage. And Jamal Adams just isn't that guy, yet we all think he's a good player, right? So
he's a great player.
That's the big tricky thing with him specifically, I think, compared to any other safety, is that you would not even put him into the same conversation as some of the, I would say, above average cover safeties in the NFL. Let's point to...
No, dude, but we don't do that with quarterbacks. Like, Cam Newton's a different quarterback than everybody else because he runs the ball so much. But it's not like, hey, he's a different kind of quarterback. Like,
well, he's still taking the snaps from under center, right? Where with Jamal Adams, I mean, he is not someone that you're necessarily throwing out in some sort of a coverage situation. His job is essentially, I'm going to track down anything that's within 8 yards of the line of scrimmage, whether it's to my left or to my right or right up the middle.
Well, but Cam Chancellor was a safety. What's different about the way that Jamal Adams played than the way Cam Chancellor? Like, there was never any sort of sense that Cam Chancellor's a linebacker. Like, his value is as a safety.
Well, you'd be able to speak to this better than me, but were they lining him all over the field the same way that the Seahawks were lining up Jamal Adams? Because with Adams, it's very interesting to see all the spots. I mean, almost 100 snaps on the defensive line. I mean, that's something. I don't know if that was... at least to that volume.
So does that mean that he gets 100 snaps credit at defensive end? Like that's not how it works, right? Like wide receivers, you don't have a slot receiver designation, and you don't have an outside receiver designation. Like even when Jimmy Graham tried to argue that he was not a tight end, he was a wide receiver because of how many times he split out wide. Like that's not how it works.
I think that the NFL would love to have a slot receiver designation, though, that you bring it up, because that would definitely allow them to pay a lot less for some of those guys that are playing in the slot. But yeah, you're right with Jimmy Graham. Yeah, he tried to make the case that, I mean, look, Jimmy Graham was a wide receiver. He's not a guy who could block.
No, he was a tight end. He wasn't a very good blocking tight end. But he was a tight end. Like, that's the position he played.
His skill set fit more, though, that of, I think, a wide receiver.
But that's a different – I guess that's the thing. Every player, when they're in a certain spot, they bring certain assets to that position and certain liabilities. Jamal Adams is a safety, and one of his assets as a safety is the size and speed that he combines, right? That he can, if you get him in a one-on-one blocking matchup, if you assign a tight end to block him, or if you assign a running back to block him, one of Jamal Adams' advantages is that he is going to be harder to match up with in that situation.
Doesn't that sound like a linebacker?
No, it doesn't, because he's also responsible for the coverage things, and if you get him locked up in those coverage responsibilities, he's on the field as a safety. It's not like they're playing four linebackers or putting a different linebacker in the scheme. There's not some sort of where he morphs into. The way that teams account for him is they account for him as a safety.
I understand what you're saying, but aren't linebackers asked to do more now, and it almost sort of crosses over into some of the same responsibilities as safeties? Because you just said a moment ago, linebackers in coverage, I would say, 10, 15 years ago, were we seeing the same degree of linebackers in coverage that we are now, where the guys are at the top level?
Teams didn't throw the ball as much because teams ran the ball more. And because now you see more multiple receiver sets, and they're more often going with either 11 personnel or not having any running backs. 3 and 4 wide receivers are kind of the standard sets that are there, and that means your linebacker has to play more. There's a difference between, is a defense a nickel back? Is he a linebacker because he's coming in and playing the spot of a linebacker?
No, he's not. Right. So see, that is a strong argument against him. But I do think that linebacker responsibilities and certain safety responsibilities have sort of become this same area where it's generally the same kind of responsibilities that they're now being asked to do. So that's where I think Adams would have a case. But to that point you just made about the nickel corner, you're right. Like that is, I mean, the guy is covering essentially a slot wide receiver where he's going to be maybe lined up against a tight end. It's just interesting to see guys like, say, in Arizona with Isaiah Simmons coming into the league. Isaiah Simmons is sort of in this same kind of mold where I don't know that he's a linebacker. I know that they would probably describe him as a linebacker, but this is a guy who at college was playing, safety and all over the field. So that's where I think – I don't think that Jamal Adams is going to win this argument, but I do wonder, like 5 to 10 years from now, if maybe we're talking about this entirely different.
I have a hard time thinking that Jamal Adams, if he was a linebacker, would be one of the 5 best linebackers in the league. He is one of the 5 best safeties. I think he's one of the top 2 or 3 best safeties because of the combination. But if you're saying that he's a linebacker, how much would he make? How good would he be if you put him at middle linebacker? He's not big enough. Like, he'd get hurt. He'd break down. He's not a linebacker. He's a safety.
I guess if you were to put him into that box, that he would have to bulk up as a result. But, yeah, you're right.
And then he'd lose his speed. Like, what he does well, he brings specific assets to the safety position that he would not have as a linebacker.